If Sony released a camera tomorrow that had 8K 120, would that make you excited enough to want to buy it? Or it could shoot stills 200 megapixels. Would that make you want it? Now, although those are pretty wild specs on paper, I don't think those are enough of a reason for people to want to buy a camera if they had those in, because we simply don't need it. But there is one thing that if someone put into a camera would be absolutely huge and potentially game over. Let's take a step back. Remember when 4K 120 wasn't a thing and you had to shoot 1080p 120, and that even sounds weird to say now, but that was only a few years ago. The same for having a second base ISO of 12,800. Now those are probably the two biggest features that I got excited about in terms of actually using in a camera, and then seeing once you put it into the timeline 4K 120 slowed down and seeing how clean and how little noise there was at a second base ISO of 12,800. It just felt like you were cheating. It was exciting to use and then see. Well, those are the new normal. That's the baseline standard for us now when a new camera gets announced. We don't really need anything more than that, and because of that, it's really hard for us to get excited about a new camera and features because there's nothing that really wows us anymore. Which begs the point that cameras are boring. Not bad. They're actually better than they've ever been before, which has led me to have the same conversation with a few people now. What's next? What is the next big thing for cameras to get us excited about to the point where we all need that camera yesterday? Now, all products go through these cycles where they kind of hit a wall, they plateau. We just get feature upon feature of new things that wow us, and then it really slows down. All those features start to trickle out to all models, and they're nothing exciting anymore. We're not wowed by them. So it just begs this question, what is next for cameras? It's definitely not going to be 8K 120 or 200 megapixels. Those are things that sound good on paper, but when you put them into the practical world of actually using them, the size to deal with those files, even to have a computer that can handle that kind of thing, it's just not realistic, and it's things that people just don't need. 8K is good for reframing, but not everybody needs to do that. So I asked everybody on Instagram what they think it could be, and I got a plethora of responses, but the one big thing that stood out, the one thing which I firmly believe will be the golden ticket, the feature to just destroy all other cameras, was the internal ND filter. You see, if Sony is able to put an internal ND filter into something like the FX3, obviously a newer version, and keep the stabilization, it's game over. And I think a lot of others would take the body size of something like the Canon C70 with the guts of an FX3, give me the exact specs that's in the FX3 right now with the stabilization, bigger body, and that internal ND, charge me $5,000, no top handle microphone, 5.5K with that top handle microphone. That's it. I'll sell everything else, I'll buy 2 of those, and a lot of other people will do the same. That is the winning camera right there, and not just for people that make silly YouTube videos like me, not just for content creators, for people that make wedding films, for real estate, for documentary work for TV. People will use that camera as a crash cam because it will be so accessible with everything they could possibly need. You'll be able to remotely control it via an iPad app. That is the camera. That is the golden ticket winner right there. Now, obviously, we don't know if that is even possible, if that would even happen. It's going to take a ton of processing power. The engineering will be ridiculously hard to do because you have to have a sensor that slightly moves around, unless there's some way to do like some really wizard kind of active stabilization stuff where the sensor doesn't move at all, and then you have the ND in there. It needs to be somewhat of a bigger body. It's going to be hard, but I think if someone's going to do it, it will probably be Sony. But with that said, you know who I'd really like to see do it? Someone like Nikon, because let's be honest, they're not a huge brand when it comes to video cameras in the grand scheme of things. So that is a feature that is extremely highly requested. If someone like Nikon was to put that into a camera, I'd be really interested in seeing how many people jump ship because of that feature. Now, I did get like 70 other responses with some pretty similar recurring themes, which I'll also talk about now as well. Internal storage. That was a big ask for a lot of people. And you know what? It makes sense. The price of storage has come right down now. To put a 1 terabyte SSD inside a camera, if you're already making the body a little bit bigger, you can charge an extra $500. I think a lot of people would buy that. I really do. DJI has it now on some of their drones, and it's really handy if you forget an SD card or you realize you don't quite have enough space on your SD card and you can't delete something because you haven't backed it up yet. You have that internal backup as an option. With the way that Sony is going as well, with everything going into like this cloud-based system as well now, imagine if that just automatically hit your Wi-Fi at home and slowly started trickling all your stuff up into the cloud to back it up, kind of like how GoPro does. That is a very good idea for a feature, which is actually useful in the real world. Now, this was probably the second biggest request, and it was Open Gate, or someone said just a bigger sensor that allows more opportunity for cropping after the fact. And that's exactly what Open Gate is. It allows you to reframe basically after you've shot your stuff, so you can have both a vertical and a horizontal aspect ratio, because, I mean, short form content now is always vertical. Your phone is vertical. You view everything vertical. It makes sense to have that in this day and age, and we don't really have any Sony cameras now. I don't think we have any Sony cameras, at least, that can do that. It's available on a lot of other systems. So I do think that will come, and I do hope it comes because it's needed. This was a really interesting one that a few people actually mentioned. 10 seconds of ultra slow-mo. Now, I guess that would have to be some form of like S and Q mode, maybe just with photos and no sound involved. But it'd be really nice to have like 1,000 frames per second for 10 seconds or 15 seconds. It's not a huge feature that a lot of people need, but it'd be pretty interesting to have, and I'm sure it can be done just with some software updates. Like, it's just a feature you could add in just to take advantage of still photos rapidly. I guess the big thing would be how quickly can you write them to the SD card. But maybe that's where another case for having the internal SSD would be useful. When you have an internal SSD that's built directly into the board, it's going to be much quicker to read and write than having an SD card would, and relying on the read and write speeds of that card. So it kind of makes sense more to have that internal SSD, because then you can do more. So I don't know. I like that as an idea though. And then there's one other camera that I think right now is in dire need, not dire need, but there's a huge potential here for Sony or any other brand to make. And that is a tiny little full frame fixed lens camera with a ton of the options that we have from the FX3, from stills cameras, just as a really pocketable camera with like a 28mm on there or a 35mm. It's obvious that these cameras are super popular now. Look at the Fuji X100V. Imagine if Sony came out with a version of that, like the R1X R2 it's called, a newer version of that with some like film simulations in there, some ones that you can create your own, have like a community where you can share ones like Fuji does with their recipe, or there's a Fuji recipes app you can download and experiment in them. That I think would do incredibly well. And there's a huge gap in the market right now. Evidently the X100V cannot be bought still, even though that's a few years old. I think Sony needs to come out with a fixed lens version of camera just like that. Then there's also the AI stuff that's coming out now, and I think this is something that's being slept on hugely right now. Like the mic on the Sony ZV-E1. That mic is just ridiculous how good it sounds without actually having a mic on top. That's all done through like AI. That is a feature that is essentially allowing you to not have to run with a mic on top of your camera anymore. That is very, very useful, very, very interesting. And you know it's the future, because look at Adobe right now with Adobe Podcast. How you can be on the other side of the room, you can record something, and then you can make it sound like a podcast. That is AI tech doing things that are just making life a little bit easier. I think we need to look at these features that are being brought out on the ZV-E1, the E7R5 with like the AI autofocus, and really start to look at it and be like, that's actually pretty useful. And I really hope it comes a little bit more mainstream, and people are sleeping on it right now. What's next? I don't know. But right now, as it stands, they're boring.